Hey guys, this is Pedro back with another video for the channel, and for this occasion, we're going to be taking a little bit of a review onto the recent announcement made by Riot Games regarding the 2025 VCT season. And without a question, we've seen plenty of changes happening within the VCT over the years of its history. But of course, this is like any other change from a given year to the next, and so that's it. I'm kind of going to give a little bit of a quick review regarding the recent changes made for this upcoming season and how that kind of compares to the 2024 season and everything else of the like. So, without further ado, let's just get right down to business. The point that I want to get to is the format for kickoff. And so it's vastly different compared to what it was in 2024. This year's edition will have a double elimination bracket featuring all 12 teams. The top four teams that qualified for the recent Champions event, they will start off with having a bye into the second round of the upper bracket. They will be awaiting their first opponent, which encompasses everybody else that didn't make champions, obviously. And so from that point, it'll just be a straight up double elimination bracket in which winners, I mean, simple story, the winners would move on to then eventually qualify for Masters Bangkok, whereas the losers will have to fight their way through the lower bracket and secure a spot through that route. And so it's a vastly different format compared to the 2024 edition. As I said, the 2024 edition featured three phases: the group stage, the play-in stage, and the playoff stage. The group stage at that point had 11 teams competing, and so two groups of four teams each, and the third group would have three teams, and the top three teams of each group would move on to the playoffs straight away. They wouldn't have to worry about getting into it or getting into playoffs through play-in, whereas the three teams that finished second place in their respective group, they would go to playoffs. They would face off against each other in a single round robin, and then the top team from that group will move on to playoffs. And then in playoffs, it'll be a single elim semifinals into finals. The winners of the semifinals would qualify for grand finals, while also qualifying for Masters Madrid. When you compare the two formats, I personally like the double elimination bracket. There's nothing like a bracket that just doesn't make it any more confusing. There's no need for us to go through like any tiebreakers, such as like having who had the most round wins, who has the better round differential. Because I remember that kind of thing happened in America's kickoff, in which Sentinels ended up having the better round or slash map differential over G2 and MIBR, and then that kind of pulled them over to the playoff stage. I mean, sure, them winning kind of nullifies any arguments that are put against them, but nevertheless, I kind of I'm not sure about you guys, but I prefer just kind of straight up elimination bracket, whereas having to have any kind of tiebreaker decide any of the qualifiers for the event. And so, in that sense, I prefer that. And the second point that I want to touch upon is the actual schedule itself, because there was an announcement made by Riot, somewhere during Champions regarding like where each Masters is going to happen and when and where Champions will be held. In addition to, I believe, Game Changers. I might be wrong on that, but still. But now with this recent announcement, we're going to see an actual. We now know when each of them of the events will be taking place, in addition to like when kickoff stage 1, stage 2, and the playoffs for the corresponding stages will be taking place. And so for kickoff, it'll be roughly from January 11th through the February 7th, and then in Masters Bangkok, it'll be February 20th to March 2nd. Stage 1 will take place 3 weeks later, from the 22nd of March through to April 25. Regular season speaking, playoffs will happen from May 3rd to May 16th. 3 weeks after that, it'll be Masters Toronto from June 7th to June 22nd. 3 weeks after that, we'll be seeing the start of Stage 2 regular season from July 12th to August 15th. A few days after that, we'll see the start of playoffs from August 16th through to the 28th. And then again, roughly around 3 weeks after that, we'll see champions from September 12th to October 5th. And then after that, we'll see Game Changers Championship happening a few sometime after that. And so, you know, all in all, it's basically the same schedule as it was in 2024, but the main difference is the space between each Masters or each international event and the start of a given domestic league. And so one of the points that Riot brought up regarding why they kind of spaced it out in such a way where there'd be 3 weeks happening, or 3 weeks between Masters to Stage 1 or Stage 2, is the fact that they've noted that plenty of teams were kind of fatigued and having to, well, for those of them that were able to remain consistently good throughout the year, they've mostly been fatigued and just kind of tired out, in the sense that, by the time they had to ramp themselves up after competing in Masters in their respective domestic league, they weren't able to do that. Obviously, the biggest example that comes to mind regarding that aspect is Sentinels. As you guys know, I've talked to a lot of the players during the season, and they kind of mentioned about how they kind of had to struggle with that in mind and have to rebound later on in the year. Obviously, this kind of thing would eventually bear fruit for them, finishing fourth place in champions. But then again, there's also this argument of like, sure, we got these teams that were struggling, it's like Sentinel and even 100 Thieves, but there's also some teams that were able to string it all together, wire to wire from start to finish, like um, Heretics. But to kind of look out for every team that kind of qualifies for Masters and remain consistently good for 2025. I can understand why Riot kind of made it such that every team doesn't have to worry about, when they have to, or what they have to do after they finish a Masters, or how much prep they need to put in order to be at a good condition once their respective domestic league starts back up. And so I feel this kind of nullifies any possibility of teams having to be fatigued. Sure, this is, one's mouth is different compared to reality, but I feel this is much better compared to last year, without a doubt. Hopefully these teams won't have to be negatively affected because of qualifying for Masters. Because I remember there was arguments about like whether qualifying for Masters during the middle of the season is actually good for a team's run in VCT, because if they were able to make the Masters, then obviously they would go through domestically, and then ultimately they wouldn't be able to qualify for champions. And we've seen that story play out for a number of teams last year. And so what I'm trying to get at is that hopefully there aren't any teams that are, so fatigued from having to compete in Masters, because ideally competing in the Masters and the Champions is should be a reward, not a burden. And so yeah. One other point that I want to talk about is the championship point system, which Riot kind of gave clarification about for the 2025 season. I'll kind of read it out to you from what they said in their statement. Similar to last year, championship points will be distributed across every stage in competition. Our goal is to make sure all parts of the season have high stakes and are of consequence. To address this, we're taking two important changes: deeper point distribution at Masters and playoffs, and making stages self contained, giving all teams a fresh start midway through the season. Regular season matches will continue to give 1 point per regular season win, while major events like kickoff, playoffs, and Masters will now reward multiple teams. The International League playoffs and kickoff will grant points to the top four teams, while Masters Bangkok and Masters Toronto will recognize the top 4 and 6 teams with points. And so I feel this is the most important change made to the VCT season in relation to 2024-2025. So now we have teams finishing in the top four for kickoff, receiving points corresponding to their placement. The same can be said for Bangkok, whereas for over there, the winner would receive 5 points. Second place will receive 30 points. Third place will be two. Third place will receive two, and fourth place will receive one. Stage one and stage two kind of already explained it by Riot, but it'll kind of happen the same way. The teams that ended up winning their respective matches in the regular season, they would have one championship point. Stage two, now we have the difference now lies in championship points being given in stage one playoffs and stage two playoffs. Also, in contrast to teams receiving championship points, only the winning team for a stage playoffs now top four gets championship points as well. And now much more teams in Masters. Toronto, the second one, will receive more championship points. Now we have clarification as to how many points a team is able to get and what they have to do in order to get these points. Because I remember very clearly from the end of stage two, and I was talking to a few players in LA during stage two playoffs, that there was still clear confusion as to whether or not a team or themselves have officially qualified for champions. I talked to King. I'm not sure if you guys remember that interview I did with him, and he kind of showed confusion as to whether or not Leviathan was still qualified or hadn't qualified yet by securing a spot in the grand finals or maybe even securing a spot in top three. But nevertheless, they were able to kind of figure that out soon enough. But there were also some teams that still hadn't really kind of understood whether or not they have officially qualified until the graphics were made and the announcement was made by Riot. And with this new system, this kind of nullifies everything about the issues regarding championship points and there being so little to be handed out and teams having to kind of be confused as to whether they garnered enough to to secure qualification for champions. Now we know like that there's going to be a lot of points being given out. Now I can assume definitely that we're going to see teams receiving a lot more championship points and there being a lot more competition, there being a lot more hype regarding how a season is going to play out. And so very interesting in that regard. Now teams can kind of bank on having to compete towards the entire year instead of just focusing on like masters and playoffs. And yeah, like I would say this brings a much more fluid system, much more healthy system, and much more um, balanced system in which you have a lot more teams competing, you have a lot more teams uh, getting championship points and a lot more teams vying for the two places that will be given to teams to qualify for champions by way of championship points. And so uh, that's definitely one thing that I'm very happy with the championship point system being revamped to this current state. So yeah, big ups on that. And so, as I said regarding the two spots that will be given to teams qualifying for champions via championship points, that's another change that was made to the VCT regular season for 2025. Unlike last year in which you'd have the top three teams that finished at the top of their respective leagues stage two playoffs, and then the final other slot being given to the best performing team through championship points. Now we're going to have the top two teams from stage two playoffs for the respective leagues. They would qualify for champions, whereas the other two teams, the top two performing teams that accrued the most championship points out of everyone else in their respective league, they would move on to champions as well. And so instead of there being a 3-1, a 3+1 kind of way of spots being given to champions, we're now going to have 2+2. And I still don't like this aspect. I mean, I kind of prefer the league worlds format or qualification format in the sense that you'd have the best performing teams that finish at the top of their league in the summer split move on to worlds, and then you'd have the other team that performed best throughout the entire year, accrued enough championship points, they would move on as well. And then you'd have like uh the final slot, which I'm talking about the best leagues, the top performing leagues like LSTK, they would go through like a regional qualifier, and they would have to fight like around 2 to 3 teams to secure the last spot, which kind of works as the last chance qualifier. Myself personally, I prefer that to be transitioned into the VCT in a sense that like you'd have two, one, and one. You'd have the top 2 teams from the league moving on to champions. You'd have the one other team that performed the best from championship points move on to champions, and you'd have the last slot being decided by LCQ. And it's pretty self-explanatory. You'd have the, I would assume, 9 teams that didn't make champions compete in another event, being a double elim bracket or anything else like, maybe having a group stage or anything like that to trim it down to where you guys can have a double elim bracket and then go from there. Basically um, have the best team from that, the winning team from that OCQ, then secure a spot into champions. I kind of prefer it that way. I'm still kind of sad, or more so pretty mad, that LCQ was done with at the after the end of the 2023 season. I mean, I understand in the sense that like the rationale that Riot presented as to why LCQ didn't wasn't really needed anymore, just to give these best performing teams throughout the entire year a chance to actually make it to champions and not have to rely on a very volatile event like the LCQ and just having them and not have to worry any like other team that would go on a deep run. But like that's the kind of shit that I want to see, man. I want to see like Cinderella stories play itself out at the very end of the year and just having, team like Crew in 2023 just kind of go on fire and just reach champions against all the odds. I mean, that made for a very wonderful moment when they did win the LCQ at the end of the 2023 season. And yeah, I'm still mad about that. I still wish for LCQ to return. Maybe 2026, who knows? But yeah, 2+2, uh, best 2 teams in stage 2, moving on to champions, and then best 2 teams from championship points moving on to champions as well. So I mean, that's the format. Can't really do anything but just to say, okay, we just have to deal with it. So yeah. All right, now focusing on into the stage 1 and stage 2 regular season slash playoffs. I kind of want to read down what Riot outlined here in their statement. The important change to acknowledge here is that we're moving away from a full round robin spanning stage 1 and stage 2. Each stage will now divide teams into groups of 6, competing in a round robin format within their group, with the top 4 teams from each group qualifying to playoffs. Groups will be shuffled for stage 2, aiming for better balanced matchups leading up to the final playoffs of the season. So, layman terms, we're going to be having a different regular season. It's going to be no full round robin, as in no teams having to play each other once throughout the entire year, domestically speaking. And more importantly, we're not going to have records carrying over from stage 1 to stage 2. I remember that was a very big contesting point from teams and fans observing the 2024 season. I know I've had my own complaints, and for the teams that were not able to have a very good stage 1 showing, they were able to then bounce back in stage 2. But because of their bad record in stage 1, that kind of pulled them back from making playoffs and just see their season end so early, despite having plenty of promise at the end. That kind of prompted fans to plead for a change in order to allow these kinds of teams to kind of have a shot in playoffs and just kind of compete, and who knows, maybe also qualify for champions. And so for that, I definitely like that, not having to worry about records carrying over, having every team kind of start off from zero for each respective stage, and so good on that. Now we're going to have playoffs of 8 teams, and I think a good reason for that is just the fact that now we have 12 teams for each respective partnership league, and so we don't really have to worry about like having to go through tiebreakers and not having to go through like teams playing an uneven schedule for stage 1 and stage 2. And I think an interesting point that brings about is the last sentence in that statement. The fact that for stage 2, the groups will be shuffled has me wondering how exactly these groups will be shuffled. Maybe Riot's going to like take the 2 groups that we would see in stage 1 and then kind of like change it by way of draw or something. But then again, there's like this possibility of like there being like teams facing off against each other twice, and might also like present a chance that some teams may not be able to face off against each other during the regular season. And I'm not sure. I'm kind of more of a believer in teams having to play each other at least once. By that sense, I kind of believe, or I kind of prefer the full round robin to be like actually 100% secure. That way teams can like have a chance to face off against each other and then maybe use that for playoffs and stuff like that. But yeah, like having to shuffle for stage two, very interesting. We're gonna have to see how that shuffling will work, whether it's by like an actual draw or having just the teams, basically how it was in 2024, in which you'd have teams facing off against everyone else that wasn't in their group in one stage, and then having to face off against those that are in their group for the other. I mean, maybe that stuff will happen, but I mean, some clarification on the shuffling part will be appreciated. But yeah, all in all, like just the fact that we're starting off with no records carrying over to stage two, that itself just makes me happy. So that is one that I agree with 100%. Final point that right brings up is playoffs for the stage 1 and 2 regular season. And as it says, playoffs will also expand to 8 teams, keeping more teams alive and in the hunt for an extended period of time. That means 2/3 of the league will have a significantly longer season and more chances to qualify for global events. Playoffs will move to a double elimination format, with the top 2 teams getting a bye to the second round and the bottom 2 teams starting in the lower bracket with an 0-1 record. And so, um, the main point that Wright wanted to address here is uh, giving teams a lot more games to play during the regular season, because you know unless you were very good, and unless you were a team that was contending for the international slots and also like the league championships, you were not going to have a lot of matches. I remember like for the very bad teams like MIBR, they only ended up playing like 10 matches, or basically just facing the rest of the league once, and then that's it. Or sure, you could add in kickoff, but like I mean, still very little. And so to kind of counteract that, right, made it such that basically grew the playoff field to 8 teams, and instead of just sticking with 6 from the past 2 years. And so I definitely understand. As for the actual like playoff format itself, double elimination, 8 teams, with top 2 teams getting a bye to the second round and the bottom 2 teams starting in the lower bracket. I definitely love that 100%. I to this day I just hated the old playoff format in which you'd have the 6 teams. Um, you'd have the 6 teams starting off in the upper bracket. The top 2 teams would secure a bye into the second round, whereas the 4 remaining teams will face off against each other. And those that lost in that first round, their season would just end. I really did not like that. I hate that so much. I remember seeing that so much in the old League of Legends, professional leagues like the LCS, and just seeing those teams kind of see their season finish just like that after not even having like another chance to play, just having to play that one best of 3 or best of 5. It really gnawed on me. I really hate that, and it's why we saw the likes of like Cloud9, a team that perform, performed pretty well in the regular season. In stage one, kind of had to see their season just end just like that. I mean, I always prefer double elimination brackets um for each like playoff event, whether it is like by international LAN playoff or like domestic league playoff. I just want teams to have another chance at the very least, having 2 lives. That's what I always wanted for each team. And so that's it. Now we're going to see a little bit of a step towards that direction. Of course, with the field growing to 8 teams, just kind of a little bit of a punishment for the two teams that ended up finishing at the very bottom of the playoff field to start off in the lower bracket. In the same way, it's kind of similar to how we saw it in the LEC. A little bit of like last year or in the previous format prior to the current one that they're taking. And I do have an understanding for that. And yeah, like just give a lot of teams a chance. That's basically what I want, especially for the teams that kind of always finish like in the top half of the regular league, a regular season league standings. Just giving them a chance, not having just not to have them play one match and then see their season end right then and there. And yeah, definitely hated that. Now we don't really have to worry that we don't really have to worry about that for 2025 for a few parts, but still, um, definitely very happy about that. And then finally, for the formats for the international leagues, basically the same way as it was for um, the past 2 years, in which, or more so this past year, um, Masters Bangkok will have 8 teams. There will be a Swiss stage, and the top 4 teams from that Swiss stage will be in the double elim bracket, same as it was in Madrid. In Toronto, basically the same as it was in Shanghai, 8 team Swiss stage, 12 teams qualifying overall. Uh, except for the teams that ended up winning their respective leagues, they would move on to the playoffs, whereas the rest of the field would have to go qualify for playoffs through the Swiss stage. They would move on, and then from that point, it'll be a team double elim. You guys already know that. And then champions, same as it was, group stage, straight up, 16 teams, 4 teams in each group, and then the top 2 of each group will move on to a straight up double elim. Same as it was, no complaints there. I kind of want that to remain forever. So yeah, I like that. And so that wraps up the review for 2025 VCT regular season. All in all, I definitely prefer it more than 2024. It's getting teams plenty of more opportunities to show their skills in the server. It's given plenty of teams to kind of have a lot of cushion to identify what's wrong with a given season or a given game, and then kind of recover from that from like stage 1 to stage 2, and then kind of start the journey to champions. And yeah, and then kind of the season also rewards those that perform well throughout the entire year instead of not kind of having rely on an LCQ to kind of award a slot to the team that won that event. And then kickoff double elim bracket, definitely like that. Uh, don't really have to worry about group stage, and also having to like not have any teams kind of perform or have a lot of matches, or not have to play a lot of matches to get to champions, because I remember like Evil Geniuses was almost close to doing that. Um they won their group by only winning one best of three. They moved to playoffs, and then they were close to winning against Loud to qualify for Masters. Playing 2 best of 3s. I didn't really like that. That kind of this new format nullifies that, and we don't have to worry about like teams not having to play a lot of stuff. Not having We don't have to worry about teams not playing much best of 3s to justify qualifying for Masters. So glad about that. And so yeah, like definitely has me excited for the 2025 season. We'll definitely be looking forward as to who will emerge to the top in each of the 4 partnership leagues. And yeah, definitely looking forward to what's going to happen next year. And so that said, I'm going to wrap it up here. Sorry for the yap session as always. And as always, this has been Pedro Romero, and I will see you guys in the next one.